Now then, so at the time of recording, yesterday they announced the Curse of the Black Sun expansion, which will be coming with next season, which is just a few days away. Well, about 9 days away at the moment. And I'm pretty excited to be honest. If you're not as familiar with the lore and that kind of thing, the Black Sun's pretty interesting, and there's plenty of interesting characters they could make cards out of. So I'm pretty excited. So I thought that I would do a little video, sort of talking about the things that I would love to see them do for this new expansion. Um, as I was kind of writing this, I realised I'm generally pretty happy with the state of the game, but there's a couple of things I'd like to see sort of looked at and changed a little bit, and obviously things I would love to see in the new expansion. So this video will kind of come in two parts, and obviously I'll chapter them so you can skip and all that kind of thing. But we'll do a section looking at sort of the things I want doing to old cards. Some of it is just general changes I want to see, and some of it is things to change in preparation for this new expansion. And then we'll sort of talk about my wish list, in effect, the things I'd really love to see from the new expansion. Because I am not smart enough to both have my ideas ready and just keep recording off the fly, I'm gonna start the recording here and we'll start the next section. So for the old cards, I think the main thing I wanted to see changed, they've actually already announced that they're going to do, which is a change to ORNATE CENSER. So the problem we have with ORNATE CENSER is it's it's a weird card. It's a weird card. I don't hate them for making it. I don't think it was a stupid idea to make it. Um, it was very experimental, I guess. But I think the way that it operates just leads to very unsatisfying outcomes. So, I mean, I'm assuming you all know what it does. It just swaps the highest and lowest power units on the board, which, as a card, um, plays really nicely into some archetypes. I mean, we've seen it in Precision Strike, for example, because it just makes sense for Precision Strike to run it. But the problem with it is it operates like toll removal, um, in the way that your opponent is punished for making a very tall unit, which is fine. We do need toll removal. Removal does need to exist. That isn't really my problem with it. The problem is the innate gain from it. So what we see with a lot of toll removal, so if you consider something like Morkvarg, Karathi, they're a bit more healthy because what they do is they remove the points for your opponent, but you don't typically generate that much on your side. It's how control in general works in card games, that removing your opponent's threats do not typically generate you value, or if they do, it's very minimal value. And so things like Vincent, Morkvarg, Karathi, Curse of Corruption, all of these kind of lead to dealing with one of your opponent's threats, which is completely fine, but you don't get much value from it. Like Vincent, very expensive card, but you get like 3 points payoff, and it's semi-conditional because you need to get a status as well. Morkvarg, you generate 5 points, which isn't a ton. If you got 5 points from a all provision card, you would say it's bad. So that kind of puts some context to it. Curse of Corruption and Karathi. Karathi plays for no points on your side, and Curse of Corruption obviously runs the risk if you have tall units. So they're kind of fine because it's removing your opponent's threat, and you don't get much of in return. That's kind of the payoff. You're removing their points, but you're not generating. However, how ORNATE CENSER works is like a toll removal that generates you obscene amount of points, which just does not work out in the game state. It's kind of hard to put into words, but you shouldn't be rewarded for your opponent's game plan. Because how all the other toll removals kind of work is you interrupt your opponent's game plan, whereas with ORNATE CENSER, you are actually rewarded to your opponent getting a very tall unit, whereas the others just get you very good value when they do. I hope that makes sense. It makes sense in my mind, but I mean, that's how I see it. Now, luckily they have announced that it's just getting reworked. In effect, the card itself will do something different, which I'm really glad to see, and I can't even begin to theorize about what it could be. I mean, they could do literally anything, change it to whatever they like, so I'm not even trying to guess what they could do, but I'm just glad to see that change. And that one lined up as like, this is the number one thing I want to see change for next season, and they've already announced they're doing it, so I'm pretty happy. Now, the next thing I want to see is just a tiny bit of support for DEATHWISH. Now, I mean, we've seen it season after season. They've been giving support to DEATHWISH, but we've kind of seen that it's always lingered as a deck where you can get wins, but it's not really that good. I mean, I would say it's typically worse than like Keltulis. Keltulis isn't really played that much, which kind of puts this on how what it is as an archetype. I mean, I don't want to speak as though like I know how to balance it and they're all being stupid. I don't think that at all, but I think the problem for DEATHWISH isn't that the DEATHWISH abilities are bad, because a lot of them are pretty good. You know, Detlaf we've kind of seen is very high value. Maruna is very, very good. Even Manticore's pretty good. Werecat's really good, and the bronzes have got to a point where they're pretty solid. Things like Rot Fiend, and even like Harpy's Egg, still, you know, pretty good cards. I think the issue comes from the lack of power in the support cards. So consume cards are just bad. Basically, consume cards are really bad, because although like Maruna, for example, looks amazing, you know, stealing a 4-power unit with a, now is she a 5-power body? I think it's a 5-power body. So that's like 13 points. 13 for 9, really good. However, to activate this, you're going to need a consumer of some form. So let's say you play a Bargeist. That's playing a 5 for 5 as a body. And all of a sudden, when you consider that, okay, a 5 provision card should be playing for about 8 points. So that kind of means that you're playing under points for that. So between the two cards, it works out that really getting that much value, compared to a typical like 9 provision card, 5 provision card, you're basically gaining same amount of points. It's on the low end even, because between the two, you would have to play. You play 6 provisions over the 4 provision floor, and you get points would be 18 points. 18 points, which just isn't good. That's really not that good, to be honest. And that's kind of the problem we have, is the DEATHWISH abilities are really good. And we see like Rot Fiend, for example, plays for like 10. There's a lot of good DEATHWISH units. The problem is consumes are not only not very efficient for points, they're also really slow. Really, really slow. Because if the consume is on deploy, then you have to let your DEATHWISH unit sit there for a round. If they have it as an order, you have to let your consume sit there for a round. So it doesn't really synergize all that well. And one of the things they kind of did to change that was the third. Third was really, really good. Really improved things, being able to circumvent that by having a card in your graveyard that will tune the unit as it's played, so you kind of get rid of that awkward kind of interaction I was talking about. But yeah, I'd just like to see something more on that consume kind of side. I think the DEATHWISH units themselves are fine. It's just the support surrounding it, a bit of beefing up, I think. And then we're looking at a deck that's, you know, pretty competitive. I think it's just on the cusp. Now, another archetype that I think I was looking at, this is kind of in prep for the new expansion, is the bandit archetype, because it just makes sense that bandits should be a thing. because let's face it, we better get Renfri from this expansion, and it would kind of make sense for bandits to be a bit more prevalent, and nearly all those cards have just become useless. There's just a massive flock. I mean, you can go right now and search the word bandit, see if there's any of those cards that would realistically see any play. They just don't. It's simply, they're all pretty bad. So I'd really like to see an improvement to, because it would kind of make sense for the new expansion to have some bandit cards, lore-wise, anyway. And that's something I like to see. I like to see a little bit of beefing up on the bandits. How exactly they do that, it's kind of up to them. Could look at just beefing up the raw numbers. Some of them would just benefit from, dealing 1 damage, being 1 point higher, being provision cheaper, anything like that. Help, or if some could do to just be straight up reworked. Some of them are just undervalued, and some of their abilities are just in power crept, to be honest. So I'd like to see those get looked at a little bit. And the final thing I want to sort of see from the old cards is Defender. So Defender's kind of a weird one. I'd really like to see some form of change to Defenders, mainly because they play weird. They play really weird in Gwent. Obviously other games have ways of like protecting your cards. So like Yu-Gi-Oh has get into Yu-Gi-Oh, but there's a lot of different ways to like protect your cards, but they're all circumstantial. There's always ways to work around them in effect. So Yu-Gi-Oh has stuff where like you can't target cards with abilities, but anything that doesn't have a target just hits the entire board, still works. So, for example, that kind of stuff, there's always like workarounds. Whereas in Gwent, you basically just have kill the defender or you purify it, but purify is really bad value, really bad value. All of your answers to defenders are pretty inefficient, especially because all of them are kind of set up to be a bit bulky. A Cave Troll, for example, you need to put 4 extra damage in before you start damaging it itself because of the armor. Covenant of Steel, very similar, has 2 armor. It also generates armor if you can't just kill all in one. Azar, for example, spawns like 2 really awkward tokens for you to remove. Economy, it has a shield. You get what I'm saying. They're very inefficient and awkward to remove. So I'd like to see some way to deal with them, whether that's changing Defender outright, just the way it works. If there was a sort of a better way to deal with them, a more efficient way to deal with defenders, I'd really like to see that in effect. I think having defensive tools like Defender is good. I just think how they operate right now leads to some pretty toxic things. It certainly sets up some decks that you either remove their defense. So things like Melusine, for example, because Covenant is just so sticky, it's hard to remove. And even if you remove it, they have Fukusha to bring it back, or Stick Drift, right? Kind of leads to this situation where you need multiple answers to basically one threat. You need an answer to the defender and the Melusine, and then you need another answer to the defender and the Sigvold. A lot of decks can't do that. It kind of leads to the situation. So I'd really like to see defender dealt with. Not removed outright, not removing the ability to protect your cards from removal, but just a little something to change that interaction a little bit, make it a little bit healthier. And I think that's all I want to see from the old cards. I think a lot of it's been dealt with pretty well. Obviously, everybody complains about Erendite, and I do think it's a bit of a problem card, but the change to Temper Vision's really helped. It's only played in the decks that should be playing it now, and sure, it is still really good, but everybody's talked about Erendite already. It's a weird card. For now, I'm happy with where it's at for now. I'm not completely happy. but I can live with it. I can live with it for now, which is something. So again, we'll do another section. I've been talking for like 50 minutes. I need a drink. Then we'll have a look at my wish list for the new expansion, the things I really want to see. Now, for the new expansion, we'll just start with the obvious. We've got to get a Renfri card. She's such a great character, and I mean, I don't really use the Gwent subreddit, but I am aware that the guy who has been making custom cards every single day until Renfri is released for the past like year and a bit, the guy just needs releasing. Just set him free. He's been working hard. But I'd love to see a Renfri card. It's well overdue. And that kind of leads me into what I mentioned before. Bandits. It makes sense that there would be a bandit archetype. How they would do this would be a little awkward, with them being a lot of them being neutral. I mean, I'm sure there is some way you could have faction cards that kind of work with bandits, have that kind of synergy there, even though they're like separate cards. So have a monsters card, for example, that interacts with bandits a certain way that's very thematic with monsters, same for Nilfgaard, so on and so forth. So the bandits operate as like a package you would put in your decks that interact with your faction cards depending on which faction you are. And that would be very thematic with like the whole bandits mercenary kind of idea. Of them kind of work in different ways depending on which faction they're working for, in effect. So I'd really like to see some changes like that. Now, the other card I want to see is a new Stregobor card. I mean, Stregobor also makes sense lore-wise to be in this expansion because the current Stregobor we have is just kind of bad. It's basically just a mill card, nothing else. And when a card that's like a really interesting effect is basically just used because it says draw on it, suggests that maybe it's not that viable, not that good. So I mean, I'd love to see another Dragobot card because it makes sense with the whole lore thing, and I'm not going to go over the whole lore of like the Black Sun and stuff. That's the topic for another video. Just Google it, have a bit of a read up. It's very interesting stuff. And I mean, the last thing I really want, this is probably the biggest point, is really, really hope that these cards are balanced correctly. Because what we've found with every single expansion when it comes out is the balance just isn't quite right. A lot of cards are very close, but they're not quite right. And what this leads to is it almost like kills the hype a little bit because, a new expansion comes out, everyone's like super excited for it, wants to try out the new cards. Very quickly, people realize that these cards are just so out of place and overtuned. And this has kind of been just a running theme that we've seen again and again. And this isn't like me CDPR bashing, because card balance is immensely difficult, and I'm aware not a great deal of resources are being allocated to Gwent, so I understand that it's difficult, but there's been a few too many times, or far too many expansions for me to count, where this has been the case. I mean, we saw with Master Mirror that warriors were just broken on release, were just too powerful, and the changes they required really wasn't that much. There was a few points here and there, slight changes to abilities, and they were fine. And then we saw it obviously last expansion. Golden Necker, I absolutely love the addition of Golden Necker. I think it adds a huge amount. Having deck limitations in order to play a powerful card is very, very good. But what we kind of saw in tandem with a lot of the other cards resulted in it just kind of being overtuned to the point where every single deck should be playing it, and any deck that isn't just was playing at a disadvantage because that good. And obviously, Erendite leaned into this a huge amount. Erendite was a big part of that. And obviously, CENSER is another one that just changing. And so I just kind of really hope that these cards are a bit more fitting, I think is the best way to put it. Just don't fundamentally break what's already in place, because, as I kind of mentioned, I think the balance at the moment is pretty solid. Obviously, there's things that are wrong, but I have plenty of experience in card games. Obviously, there are people that think that Gwent is like balanced and broken and these things are overpowered, but in general, things are pretty good in Gwent. Trust me on that. When you have 6 factions and all of them a deck that can, at least one deck that can compete and fight in the meta, that is a good sign. Obviously, there are some things that aren't too great, but when you have Syndicate, you have Poison and Off the Books, you can even Jackpot. Jackpot is still perfectly fine. Nilfgaard has like a million decks. You can play. You can get Hyper Thin. You can go statuses. I mean, Aristocrats is pretty good at the moment. Bit of one that's flying under the radar. Or Assimilate. Northern Realms have Stockpile. They got Traveling Priestess. Still got Alumni. Nobody seems to be playing Alumni, but Alumni is still pretty good. You can do the Mutagenerator version of Stockpile. You kind of see my point. There are a lot of decks that can compete, and don't get that in an unbalanced game. If any of you have enjoyed Hearthstone, you know how it is when a game is truly unbalanced, where one faction just dominates. Because I've enjoyed the times of the Quest Rogue and Pirate Warrior and all those kind of things that were just so unbelievably dominant that nothing stood a chance. And Gwen quite simply doesn't have that, and hasn't really had that since. I mean, last time I can think of it is like maybe pre-hotfix Warriors. First decks can. I mean, to an extent, Meditating Mages was definitely a problem, but that was fixed very quickly, and I don't think it was that dominant. Not to the extent that Warriors was, at least. So, I mean, that's just kind of my hope, is that there's already a good basis balance-wise for Gwen, and I really hope that this expansion hit the scales. It's kind of my point. Obviously, there's a lot of really interesting characters they can bring in, so I hope that the abilities to give them are both thematic and somewhat balanced. I know it's not going to be perfect on release, it never will be, but just a bit closer to balanced, I'd be happy with. Nothing broken first day, and I just pray that we don't get any first day bugs. It's kind of become a bit of a meme at this point where the first day is full of bugs. I'd like to play on the first day and not encounter a game breaking. So I think I've done plenty of things. If even a handful of these are done, I will be a very happy man. And I'm pretty excited because, as you've seen, I've not really posted videos last week. I had other shit to do, so I'm kind of ready to get back in next season and really dive in. I got some new stuff because I've always got ideas. So I hope you enjoyed. As always, if there's anything you want to see, you can comment below. We can have a little talk about it. I will catch you in the next one.